Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello everyone! Welcome to Arcane Mark. Today we are going to be talking about the Force element for Battlezoo Alderaan for Pathfinder 2e and D&D 5th edition. We're doing a beginner's guide. So if you want to use the Force and do some really good blasting damage while moving things around on the battlefield to suit your fancy, like a chess master to whom every single combatant is just another piece on the board, Force is the element for you. And with this guide, you can go from being confused about what all of the Force options are to being ready to make one of several Force-based builds, whether it's super manipulating battlefield control all the way to like throwing objects at people and focusing more on damage. We've got those today in Arcane Mark. So what we're going to do is we're going to get started by talking about the Force powers that you can select, going level by level through your powers as you level up, which ones you might want to switch out, which ones might be a good choice or synergize together. Then we're going to talk about the Alderaan themselves and which of the builds that we suggested with the powers each Alderaan enjoys the most based on their elemental benefits. And so that is what we're going to do. And when you're done with this episode, you will be ready to make your Force elemental avatar or a build for one of your Force Alderaan that is going to just be a real fun damager plus controller moving everything around.
So I see a question in chat that's more of a conceptual question I think would be cool to address up front. Says, I have a design question. Force seems like quite a vague element. How did you decide you wanted to focus on repositioning as a main thing?
Okay, so that's a good question. So Force, in this case, there's a lot of weirdness with Force because, like, isn't bludgeoning kind of a force? Isn't slashing kind of a force? But the way that magical forces have often been used is with the concept of telekinesis, movement at a distance. So the Force element is very based off of the fantasy of telekinesis. It is a mystical, metaphysical force that can move or blast things even at a distance, which literally telekinesis is, movement at a distance.
And then when you're hitting things with telekinesis into people, when you see those kinds of effects, those types of things might be, okay, you threw a rock at someone with your telekinetic powers. That's one thing. But then the Force element also has the concept of just dealing force damage, which was kind of just this raw damage type that is really hard for things to resist.
So what I did is I created a philosophical section because I guess I didn't say this in the beginning, but I wrote all of these elements when I was creating Battlezoo Alderaan. So there's a philosophical section for each element's philosophy. So the Force philosophy is that the element of Force weaves a web filled with strands of aether, congealed force, moving others around as it pleases, like a puppet master. When those who don't understand the Eld hear the word Force, however, they often think of phrases like brute force, and expect the Force element to be unsubtle and fierce, causing great collateral damage. It's true that Force is capable of great exertions and powerful assaults, but because of its flexible nature, Force is often much subtler in the way it affects the world around it. Those Eld adherents who seek to emulate Force are thus often more careful and deliberate about the way they interact with others, occasionally acting more detached, like chess masters moving pieces on a board. When entire groups or societies devote themselves to the way of Force, they pay attention to the connections and threads between them, learning how each member of the community exercises a push and pull of Force on each other through their daily routine. This can lead Force followers to act as an organic whole in a way that seems mystifying or almost psychic to outsiders, as one community member acts in advance, almost as if to anticipate another member's needs. The truth is, this is a bond forged not of telepathic communication, but purely through a deep understanding of the forces within the community and their equal but opposite reactions. So that's sort of the philosophy that we are going through here with Force. All right. So moving on, it sounds like we have people who want to use the Force, so let's talk about some of these Force powers. When you are starting off, your first two active Force powers that you're going to be able to use to attack are going to be Force Jab and Jumbling Threads. Force Jab is your single action attack. All right. So the damage dice I'm giving here are in Pathfinder 2. In 5e D&D, they generally are always up one die size, but they have about half as many dice. And the reason why is that's about how the damage scaling works. It doesn't always go exactly like that. Careful math has been done to make sure that the damage scaling is appropriate in both systems. So for Pathfinder, the force jab is doing d8s of damage to a foe within your reach. You're kind of jabbing out with force and then moving them around. So if you succeed, you deal those d8s of damage and you reposition them within 5 feet and they become off guard. If you critically succeed, then you could deal double damage, moving them up to 10 feet. Even on a failure, they get to pick whether or not they are off guard or they move 5 feet. They pick the one they want. So even if you fail and you get to pick where to move them if they let themselves be moved. So you're like, okay, either you're going over here or you're going to be off guard. Which one do you want? So you're still going to be helping out your team or messing up the enemy no matter what, unless you critically fail.
So a few things to note about this one, that it's particularly hard to resist this ability because with, force damage is easier to resist than other types of damage. And also when it comes to abilities that can reposition others across the battlefield, usually there's some kind of idea that, you're physically grabbing and shoving them. Maybe if you are medium size and they are the size of a kaiju, maybe that's not gonna work so easily. But this doesn't have as much of a sense of space and size though, right? Because it's just the magical forces doing it.
Yes. And so there's a rules question, is this considered a push or pull? It very, very, very much is not. It's extremely intentionally not stated to be a push or a pull. It says it's a reposition in any direction. The water element specifically says that it pushes or it pulls, depending on your which one you have active at the time. I think, did we do a guide on water? I think we did. Whether or not we did, that's still true about water. This one is definitely not a push or pull. It's omnidirectional. You can move them any way you want to. It doesn't even have to all be in the same direction, right? You can move them up to 10 feet, which way.
Could you move them out and then back again? Or around or things like that?
As long as you move them up to 10 feet, you can move them whichever way you want.
So, is this, in Pathfinder, is this a forced movement type thing where...
It sure is.
Yeah.
Of course it's forced. I mean, it has force in it.
Yeah.
It's not only a forced movement, it's a forced movement. But, yes, it's forced movement. I mean, even the water is forced movement, but it's a push or a pull.
Yeah.
So the other option you have when there's multiple enemies, or you just don't want to go right next to something to move it, is jumbling threads. So jumbling threads is going to do D4s, but they also add in half your level afterwards. So it's kind of like D.5 or D4.5, maybe D5. It's halfway between D4s and D6s. And it's a cone that starts at 15 feet and goes up to 20, and then eventually goes up to 35 foot cone. And basically, it deals half damage on a success. A failure is full damage, and you can reposition them up to 5 feet to any other square within the cone that's up to 5 feet. They can't go out of the cone. And critical failure is the same, except for 10 feet of movement and double damage.
But it
still has to be within the cone, which for the 15-foot cone, there's not a lot to do with 10 feet, but once it grows, there's a lot more you can do.
Still, even with the 15-foot cone, oftentimes when you're hitting multiple targets with the 15-foot cone, you have to think about what's going on with your allies. Where are they? Are you going to be, damaging your friends because you've decided to go to the section where
you will not, because it only hits foes within it. Because it shoots out threads of aether, and the threads are going to avoid your
But allies. You can also move your allies too, right?
That is true. Allies in the cone not only take no damage, if they're willing, they automatically critically fail against the movement effect, and you just put them up to 10 feet away, just like the enemies who critically failed, but within the cone. So you're not only jumbling up the enemies, but also your allies. So let's say, for example, that you have an ally who got stuck on the other side of an enemy. You could potentially move the enemy away, and even if you can't, you can pull the ally around and towards the side where the rest of the party is, where they can be healed instead of being stuck. In a session that Linda and I were playing yesterday, our barbarian got basically stuck because an enemy with a reaction that hard countered movement even on a regular successful attack roll, who had reach, had positioned themselves to block off the barbarian while another one of them came into the midst of all the rest of the party.
Yeah.
But with Jumbling Threads, I was actually playing an elemental avatar, but it was fire, not force. If I had Jumbling Threads, I could have potentially fired it off in that direction towards the two of them, pulled the barbarian closer, because I think the enemy was 20 feet for me, the barbarian was 15, something like that, and I was high enough level to have the 20-foot cone, theoretically. Pulled the barbarian from 15 feet away to adjacent, where I could then use battle medicine on the barbarian, and then maybe like move the enemy away, or just left them there. Even if they made their save, it would have been fine, because actually pulling the barbarian would have been what was important.
And because your ally can just choose to have it work, you don't have to. That's a guaranteed effectiveness, as long as you aim it right.
Correct. So those are really cool, and Force is just all about these kind of fun combos. And Rohit says Force pairs nicely with Ice. Yes. Ice and Wood are even better because you create tons of difficult terrain while lowering move speed. Obviously, if you have Ice Force and Wood, it's like a disaster for the enemies. Because you forcibly move them into the bad terrain, into the difficult terrain. It's not dangerous, so you can still move them into it. Maybe even through greater difficult terrain. They have to get back through it. It's much harder.
And
they've been slowed by the ice.
Down,
it's just a disaster for them. So, those are very good combos in general. And, Kojo, you're right. Force is more precise than fire. It's not just a blunt instrument. So, you also have the reaction force rebuff, where an enemy hits you with a melee attack, and you basically give them their equal but opposite reaction to send them away. So, they roll a fortitude save. On a success, they choose to either become off guard until the end of their next turn or be repositioned 5 feet. On a failure, both of them happen, which could break up their attack routine and force them to step back up to you. And a critical failure, they're off guard for 2 rounds and repositioned 10 feet. So they can't even step back up to you. They have to stride, potentially, depending on their reach.
Yeah, and this could also help you with positioning, too, in terms of, like, maybe even if you can't knock them completely away from you, you can knock them into a position where they don't have their flank anymore.
Or maybe you're flanking them.
Or you're flanking them, or you throw them into like a really awkward corner. Now they're next to now you throw them adjacent to one of your allies, that kind of thing in general.
That's right, you can ping pong them right up to your person. Maybe you have an ally who screws around with your enemies, who that enemy stepped away because they didn't want to be near that ally, and now they are.
You just throw them right back into that ally's face, so they have to decide, did they attack that person, or did they try to come back up and fight you?
So what about the refresh power? That's what you have to do when your active powers are done to get all of your powers back. So it's always good if you have something cool that you're like happily willing to use on some of those turns. And as we've seen in our previous guides, some of those refresh powers can be more powerful situationally. Some of them are just kind of generally good, but not ever going to be super strong. So the refresh power is called Force Gambit. You use strands of force to rearrange force energy and refresh your powers while shifting your allies' positions. So all willing allies within 60 feet of you step in the direction of you choose. By the way, all these powers except the reactions are 2 action powers. So 2 actions, all willing allies step in the direction you choose. It's not a reaction or anything for them. They just do. You don't. Your willing allies do. And then you refresh your power.
So it's one direction you pick and everybody goes that way?
It can be a different direction for each ally.
Direction.
They basically, you get to pick, though. They decide if they're willing, but they don't get to pick which direction it is, because it's not like the commander class where you're like, hey, you can step, and then they can decide where they're going to step if they decide to listen to you, because you're calling out to give them a command. You're literally puppeting them. So if they're willing to let you move them like a chess piece, then you get to decide where they went. And it's whichever direction you want for each one. So you're basically nudging all of your little pawns across the board with your force. That's what it's called, Force Gambit. It's intentionally using sort of a chess analogy. All right, so that can be like really clutch, moving the whole team except for yourself by 5 feet. So and then you have an action left, so you can move yourself with that.
So this is a suite that you've got at level 1.
That's level 1. So what about level 3? So we've seen what our basic chassis is. Let's see what you might want to pick at level 3 depending on what build you're trying to build for your character. So you get 2 choices to replace either Force Jab or Jumbling Threads. You can either pick Force Propel, where it is an attack like Force Jab was, but it's ranged. A ranged power attack roll to send threads of force to damage and reposition a foe at range. You're sending out like ranged little attack thread. That one is d6s of damage. It's going to reposition 5 or 10 feet on a critical success. The failure is that your foe chooses whether that they take minor damage or reposition by 5 feet. So the minor damage is basically 2 plus your level, which is still better minor damage than almost any of these do on a failure, but that's because they also had the opportunity to not take it and choose to let you move them 5 feet if that's what they want.
So, as compared to the Force Jab, this is ranged at 60 feet instead of melee.
And
also.
It can't do off guard, but it can do damage if they don't want to be moved. If you've got enemies who refuse to be moved, and no matter what, then Force Jab will make them off guard, and this one will do not the greatest damage, but 5 damage on a miss is not nothing at third level when you first get it.
Yeah.
That's not nothing. So the Force Maneuver is a powerful third level power, but it comes at a cost. And I said before, do you want a damaging build? Do you want a really controller build? This is very controller build because it does not do almost any damage. It does a little bit. So it is a 2-action disarm, shove, or trip a creature within 60 feet using a power attack roll instead of your athletics. And then the range increases by 30 feet, basically at 7th level and every 4 levels thereafter. And starting at 7th level, they take force damage equal to your level on a successful power attack roll. And force damage equal to twice your level on a critical success, which is very low.
Yeah.
But does eventually do a little bit of damage.
But it's mostly about having access to flexible maneuvers that you can pull out and use that power attack roll, which is probably going to be better than your athletics check.
Yes, that's right. So it is going to be better than your athletics check most of the time, unless you're weirdly very strength-based or you're at a level when skills are really going up. And it's at range, which gets longer and longer of a range. And so they're like... Tripping something that's right next to you is fine. Tripping something that's really far from you is very annoying for them because they have to
get up and
move up to you
position.
potentially, unless they can attack you from where they are,
or unless they have someone else nearby that they can attack. But like any of these things, using these kinds of effects to create incentives for the opponents to have to fight the people who you've deliberately put closer to them because they want to fight your front line, not your squishies, is always helpful.
Alright, so you can see how if you want single target damage, you're going to go Force Jab, Force Repel. If you want to do more control, you grab Force Maneuver. Either with Force Jab, so single target damage and control, or take it with Jumbling Threads.
And then your focus is more on
If you're focused on control,
overall,
you don't really have any good way to deal with single target damage, so against a single target, you're going to try to keep it out of being able to fight efficiently. So at 5th level, you're going to get either Change Places or Distant Heave as an active power, or you might get Force Shield as a reaction. If you're an Elemental Avatar, you actually get 2 of these because of the fact that you get one that is, and also an Eldamon. You get one that's a bonus and one that is swapped around. So, actually, I think it's Eldamon that do that. Eldamon actually have to lose their old powers to gain new powers, whereas Elemental Avatars are just gaining new things, and you just swap them out each day. So, the 2 active powers that you're going to want to consider are Change Places, which allows you to surround yourself in a web formed of threads of force, damaging foes and repositioning them, while you're also moving your allies. So it is very similar to Jumbling Threads, except for that it is actually in a 30-foot emanation, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's
especially
if you're in to aim too.
If you're in an AP with tiny rooms, that's hey, it's the whole room.
Yeah.
So it's the same amount of damage, it's the same amount of movement, it's the same amount of moving allies 10 feet that you love from Jumbling Threads, but except for now it's an emanation. So if you want to be the chess master who's moving everybody around, you pick this up. Also, at 5th level, you actually can hold on to 3 powers at once. So you could theoretically have, for example, Change Places, Jumbling Threads, and Force Maneuver or Force Propel all at the same time and just be moving everybody around.
Yeah. And it could be worth it to have both Jumbling Threads and Change Places at the same time if you really want that to be your focus, because then when you're looking at the cycle of powers, you can do that sort of thing more often.
Now, distant heave is your other option. It's definitely more focused on a single target, and it is also very, very control-based. So, if you're the control-based force maneuver build, you may want to consider distant heave. Basically, you pick a target within 120 feet, and depending on its fortitude save, you can move them either 20 feet on a successful save, 40 feet on a failed save, or 80 feet on a critical failure.
That's a lot of moves.
And if they are an ally, then they can choose to let you move them 80 feet.
So this is like the cannon the barbarian into the frontline power.
Well, if you think that's the cannon the barbarian into the frontline power, wait until you see fastball special at level 9. But it is at least a cannon the barbarian or move the enemy ridiculously far away. Like, imagine you used ice to slow their movement speed. Like, getting those 80 feet if they critically failed, that's going to take you a long time. It's not an incapacitation effect because they technically still have all their actions, but
if they don't have,
if it takes them three actions to move 80 feet, then you very well might have made them lose an entire turn with distant heat. But it deals no damage. It never deals any damage, no matter what. So it's very much part of the control build for force. But it can be a lot of fun if you just be like, get over there! The opposite of get over here. Or you can do get over here and pull them towards you if you want.
Yeah.
So the other reaction choice, if you don't like force rebuff because they have to actually get into melee with you and you're hoping to stay away by moving them, is force shield. At that point, if they target you with an attack period and you can see them, you can put up a force shield. Gives you a +2 circumstance bonus to AC until the end of their turn. Not just for that one attack, but for their whole turn.
Yeah.
And not only that, if their attack roll critically fails while the force shield is active, you choose another target other than them that's adjacent to you within reach for a melee attack, or within range for a ranged attack, and they have to attack that target. So, if they don't have any of their own allies within their melee reach, they're safe. But if they do, then on a critical failure, you can force them to re-roll their attack roll against their allies, which is basically repositioning the attacks.
Because isn't like the shield spell kind of like a shield of magical force theme too?
It kind of is, yeah, but the force shield is much more powerful.
Yeah, this is more powerful because it's also then taking that redirection.
And it uses your reaction. It's twice as much AC. It doesn't cost an action on your turn.
Yeah.
It doesn't defend your hit points in any way, but it will redirect attacks that critically fail into attacking whoever you want. I mean, I guess you could attack one of your own allies, but honestly, if that's the only valid target, you could just choose not to do that. Unless you're a jerk. Alright, so you've already seen how the builds can really diverge up to this point, but we're going to start opening up another type of build, which is throwing objects at people once we get to level 7. But not yet, because first we're going to look at Locomotion Shred. So Locomotion Shred is a form of damaging soft area and crowd control. It's actually technically a single target control. So we talked about moving people really far away. With Locomotion Shred, technically they can do whatever they want. You choose it for within 100 feet, and what happens is that they roll their reflex save. And depending on their reflex save, they will take damage up to your level +2, so let's say 9 when you first get it, for every square they move. So on a successful save, basically their next move action, they still take 9 damage for every square they move on their next move action. And also the damage increases a little bit at 15th level. I believe that it increases.
Yeah, it says 3+.
Yes, level +3. So it increases
every square,
by 1 more at level 15. So on a success, that means now what they could do, of course, is intentionally not move very far on their next move action after they succeeded. But then you kind of wasted some of their action.
Yeah.
They could take one and be like, and I'm not moving. Then they wasted an entire action not moving. If they actually move 25 feet, even on a successful save, that's actually going to deal them 45 damage.
Yeah.
So
it's really going to lock them down.
Yes. And on a failed save, then that happens on the first move action of every turn until next time you refresh. And if you reposition your target with the force power, it takes force damage equal to your level. from the same shred,
Yeah.
even though it was forced movement. And on a critical failure, basically every move action period will deal the 9 damage per square.
So they can't just get away with it being like, all right, fine, I'm gonna step on the first one and then move through the rest of the next move action.
And your forced movements deals twice your level. So just think about that, because if they critically fail and then you don't refresh, just like every time you kite them and make them move 25 feet, they take 45 damage.
Yeah.
It is incredibly devastating to a melee opponent who critically fails their fort save, or reflex save. If they critically fail their reflex save and they don't have a ranged
the
attack,
fact that it's reflex is important because a lot of your big melee creatures are going to be highest on their fortitude rather than their reflex.
So if you run circles around them, you can really do a lot of damage to them from the locomotion shred. Now, if you're not refreshing your powers, you're also leaving a lot of damage on the table. If you're done with them and you're just like, well, I landed a critical failure on the locomotion shred, so this is going to be my contribution. Let's laugh at their horrific damage taking. So, let's say you're not doing this control build where you did locomotion shred, change places, locomotion shred, distant heave, and force maneuver as your 3 powers. You might want object throw. That's getting you more into the damage build with throwing objects. So,
and as mentioned before, the idea of throwing objects at people, that's more classically represented by you literally threw a rock at them, that's bludgeoning damage type stuff.
An object throw is allowed to deal bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage depending on the object that you throw. And basically, if it's made of a special material, then the damage for object throw interacts with resistance and weaknesses and the like as appropriate, but otherwise, different objects normally have no effect. Regardless of their magical properties.
So if you're fighting against a creature that's weak to silver or whatever, and you're throwing silver knives at them, then that will have an effect.
It has to be an object of bulk 1 or 2. So, knife, no, but like a long sword or something with bulk 1,
Oh, gotcha.
yes.
Bulk 1 or 2.
Yes. And then you basically deal d8s of damage, and on a failure, the foe still takes damage of the appropriate type equal to your level plus 1. Because you use the force to like readjust it the last second and get a little hit on them.
Get a little glancing blow on them,
Because you can attach threads to these items, so you can kind of like weave the threads through the air, like as they miss. They're like, I dodged it. Not quite.
Yeah.
So that's object throw. Obviously, that's one you take if you're more of a damage-using force user, which is a little atypical, but you'll see that one of the Eldamon loves the ones where you're throwing things. Alright, so we also could choose to switch to your refresh power. Now, I have no problems with Force Gambit. I think it's actually a good refresh power, even at higher levels.
There was a question on object throw.
Okay.
What would be like an example of like some of the rare circumstances? I guess because it talks about extremely rare circumstances, the GM might determine that other properties or attributes of the item could apply.
So it says you never apply magical or physical properties of the item. So like, if you're throwing like a flaming sword, you're not going to add extra fire damage. But you might decide that something else applies in extremely rare circumstances. Like, let's say you've got the Armageddon Orb, which is like the level 20 something hazard that says like if you move it, it explodes and kills everyone in a 100-mile radius. You might decide that throwing that with object throw, it's probably too much bulk, but let's say you could do it, would also kill everything within a 100-mile radius because you moved it. Like, it's kind of it's for situations like that, where it's like, no, this doesn't allow you to, like, disarm the trap automatically by saying, well, none of its special effects happened, and I moved it.
Yeah.
I moved the trap's trigger, and that's one of its special effects.
Or, like, if you're throwing it, or, like, I guess then if you're throwing, like, a magic sword with fire stuff on it or whatever, then it's not gonna do that other kind of thing.
Well, no, that's the normal thing.
Yeah.
So the normal line says don't apply those.
Yeah,
but Rohit said in extremely rare circumstances, the GM might determine to apply them, and wants to know what would the circumstances be.
Yeah, but that's why I was saying that, like, I was saying as an example, like, that's a normal circumstance. You don't apply that. So, like, what kinds of things would you apply? Yeah, I would think that might apply more, like, there's some, like, extremely specific thing where, like, this creature has a weird thing that's like, yes, if I don't know, like, maybe you threw a holy symbol at a red cap or something.
But I think that might be an example not of the object's special properties, but the red cap special properties as well. Here's how I would do it as a rule of thumb, but you're your own GM. You can come up with your own rule of thumb. So if someone is like, hey, I can cheese this thing by throwing it and screw you over because of what I threw, and and just get huge advantages out of it, it usually shouldn't apply.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone says hee hee hee, because of the ability to negate things from the object throw, I could screw you over by throwing it and having it be negated when it should have really happened and mess up the game, then it should apply. Right? So if someone's trying to cheese around by throwing it, just whatever the opposite of what they want to do should apply. And that's it. Like the Armageddon Orb example, they'd be like, I can just get past this level 23 hazard with its level 7 power by throwing it and ignoring its magical properties. It obviously shouldn't work.
So it's basically like, if something like completely subverts all logic or would break the game type situation.
But usually you just wouldn't apply anything else.
Yeah.
So let's move on so we don't focus too much on just random corner cases of throwing objects. Let me say, as someone who's created object throwing abilities multiple times in various different game systems, they're always the ones with the most corner cases because of people coming up with this. They wind up taking like 5 times as much text as anything else.
Much if you threw a piano with the...
Yep. So anyway, Linda has... Oh, no, wait. We're not moving to level 9 because that cut off. I was in the middle of trying to say what our level 7 refresh power was. So Force Gambit, honestly, I might just keep it. But there are some other good refresh powers. Force Field creates a giant force field that basically makes physical ranged attacks against you or allies in a 30-foot emanation take a massive circumstance penalty if they're arrows, bolts, or bullets, -4, or -2 if they are like bigger ones like javelins, and like a catapult is fine. It's not.
So this is kind of like a wind wall type power in terms of just like the blocking ability.
It's a force field that slows things down.
Yeah, it's a slowing force field. But I'm saying that kind of mechanic is the sort of thing I might associate with like a powerful wind wall or something like that. That's not gonna completely. It's not gonna stop you from being hit by a ballista, but it's really gonna wreck your enemy archer's day.
That's right. So 9th level, Linda kind of predicted this one. Fastball special. Using force, you throw one of the most dangerous things in the area at your foe. Your own ally, weapon first. So basically what happens is you throw your ally, they make a melee strike against the target as a free action, adding d4s of force damage, and there's a fortitude save on the d4s of force damage. Even on a critical success on the fortitude save, they still deal the strike damage. Also, very importantly, if the strike is a failure but not a critical failure, they still need to make a fortitude save against the force. So the only way they take 0 damage is either A, if the ally critically fails the attack roll. B, if the ally regularly fails the attack roll, and then the enemy critically succeeds the saving throw. Any other combination than that, you'll do at least something. Though, admittedly, if the ally misses and then they succeed the saving throw, the amount of force damage you do is not anything to write home about. But it's still something. And basically, this is also a heavy damage one. So if you're doing the damage build, you would take that one with object throw. And you likely even just stuck with force jab from the beginning on your damage build. So your build at this point would be force jab, object throw, fastball special.
Yeah. So your ally, and you also have some choice about where you're putting them. If your ally has more than 5 feet of reach, you can choose where to throw them as long as the opponent is within the melee reach. I see a question here. Let's see. If your ally has reach, do they have to end up in a position where they can strike? Well, it says it's within the foe has to be within your melee reach. Yes, the foe has to be within
the ally's melee reach. So yes, they have to end up in a position where the ally can strike.
But you can choose where that is.
You choose where that is within 120 feet. The ally has to start within 60 feet of you and end within 120 feet of you. So your other option is Forceful Embrace. So this is one that could be interesting if you're going for like a more melee focused build with Force Jab, because it's a protector ability. Until you refresh, anytime somebody comes into contact with you by hitting you with a melee attack, touching you, hitting you with an unarmed attack, they have to roll a fortitude save, and you can reposition them. You do not have to if it's your ally. Although, unfortunately, your ally still does take force damage, whether you reposition them or not. So they take force damage depending on their fortitude save, and you can reposition them. If they succeed, they're fine. But on a failure, they get repositioned 5 feet, and take some force damage on a critical failure. They take more force damage on a reposition.
So you will want to be careful if your allies have touch range abilities that they would otherwise want to use on you here.
At least you don't have to reposition them. Or if you do, you can reposition them beneficially.
Yeah, you could.
If they're like, I don't really want to be next to you, you'd be like, well, fine, don't worry about it. I might deal some force damage to you, but I'll get you where you want to go. Right? And so that is, those are our choices at 9th level, depending on what we want to build. So even the control build might choose neither of the 9th level powers. By the way, it might go back for potentially one of the missing reactive or refresh powers it didn't get before, or it just might be fine with what it's doing if you're going total control. Now at 11th level, you get actually several really good options because you're going to get 2 active and a reactive power for choices to add. So foe throw, well, we've thrown our object, we've thrown our allies. What if we threw an enemy at another enemy? Classic. So choose a foe within 120 feet and throw them at another foe within 30 feet of the first foe. And basically you have to roll the first foe's fortitude save. If they critically succeed, you can't throw them at all, so it doesn't work. Even on a normal success, you manage to throw them somewhat. They resist it, but not without a cost. It chooses to either take d4s of force damage, even on a success, which is a pretty high amount on a success, or you fly them into the second foe, but they land safely and undamaged in a space of their choice adjacent to the second foe. So they either have to let you move them 30 feet up to one of their other allies, or take a pretty decent amount of damage.
So you're definitely going to want to be, when you're throwing these people, throw the enemy frontliners into the back line and the enemy backliners into the front line. Right. So that the place that they wind up is going to be a disadvantageous location.
Now, if the original person failed, not only did they take d4s of force damage, they also take d4s of bludgeoning damage. And you attempt a power attack roll against the second foe, and if it succeeds, they take the same damage as the first foe. On a critical success on the attack roll, both foes take maximum damage. So that would be like 4 instead of d4s.
Yeah. So you can have a really
it's a double 4, because 4 bludgeoning and 4 force.
Yeah.
So at level 11, when you first get this, that would be, what is that? That would be 96 on a regular failure followed by a critical hit.
Yeah, and a lot of these effects that...
To both creatures.
When a lot of these effects generally that require a second attack roll or saving throw to get their full effect can be really powerful when they line up completely right.
So here's the pro tip strategy on this one. If you can get the boss to fail the fortitude save, doesn't even have to critical fail, throw them at a mook.
Yes. Because
if you critically hit with the boss against the mook, the boss also, because the mook was so easy to hit, the boss also takes the maximum damage. It takes 96, which is great at this level. And that was on a regular failure.
Yeah.
And the mook, of course, takes 96, which is not going to be good for them. Now, on a critical failure, it's also double damage, which also means if you manage to get the boss to critically fail, well, good luck. Boss critically failing a fortitude save, unlikely. But if you then throw them at a mook, which you have a decent chance of critting the mook on the attack roll, that's 192 damage at level 11. They're both erased. Now, okay, I'm really probably overplaying your chance of critting a mook, but you have a good chance of critting a mook. So that's pretty cool. Definitely one to add to your arsenal if you are doing the damage-based build. At that point, you don't have to get in close with a force jab and really put yourself at risk, but you could keep force jab if you're worried about the fact that that foe throw on a successful save might only move them and not deal damage. I mean, that's I guess the same is true with force jab, though. You could go object throw plus fastball special plus foe throw for ranged, safe, damaging options. And you're moving them with foe throw, too.
I'm also thinking about if you have when you have a complex battlefield with different locations, like, for example, let's say that you have archers up on the tower, and then the melees are down fighting you guys, and then fighting your allies, and then you're like, I'm gonna throw the melee up onto the tower. I'm gonna, I'm gonna take the archer down off the tower and throw them at the melee, also down into where we are right now.
Correct. And Kojo points out throwing your giant instinct barbarian or your rogue into a flank, both great options. In fact, the more buffed your melee marshal can be, the more powerful your fastball special is. This is back with fastball special. Because the damage is dependent on what they do with their damage. So if you've buffed them up, if someone else on your team has given them buffs, that's going to apply to your fastball special.
So yeah, so you have like a buff focus support character and the force character, and then like the person that you buffed, and then
you throw them, and it saves them a lot of actions to be thrown there. So your other choice...
Stick haste on them or something and then get them up in there and have them do all sorts of stuff.
So the pure controller has, since locomotion shred, which is a sort of soft control, but it's very effective because they're going to die if they keep moving. The controller has been eating a little lean because there's been both good damage and kind of damage plus movement effects. But now at level 11... So, level 9 was not their level, but it was a very cool level, just not their level. Level 11 has Force Curtain, which is a giant line up to 60 feet long within 120 feet. And any creature that crosses the curtain takes d6s of force damage, but half as many as a lot of these other powers do. And then you can reposition them 5 feet. And they take force damage and reposition only once during their turn, even if you push them back through the curtain and then you have to walk through it again. You can't just be like, no, you're back through the curtain. Okay, I walk through it again. No, you're back in the curtain. I walk through it again. No, you're back in the curtain. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Which is good because of the fact that there is no save against being repositioned 5 feet, so otherwise that would be an infinite loop.
Oh my gosh.
And then at the last level 11 option is our most powerful reaction, or at least our highest level one. I mean, nothing wrong with Force Rebuff or Force Shield either. Forceful Exile. A foe within 60 feet takes a move action. You reposition them with force before they try to move. Depending on their fortitude save, critical success, it didn't do anything to them. On a success, they resist some of the forces you send to annoy them, and you still send them off course. Just before they move, you reposition them 10 feet. Or the farthest they would be able to move with their land speed, glide speed, fly speed, or swim speed in the unlikely event that this is less than 10 feet.
So, if there's a creature who really just would...
If there's a creature that has 5 feet of movement because your Ice Eldamon has put their movement down to 5 feet...
You can't cancel their entire movement.
You can only move them 5.
You can cancel their movement, you can't, more than cancel their movement.
You can at most cancel their whole move. Probably only a partial on a success. On failure, you not only you move them more than 10 feet, you force them to stride, or climb, fly, or swim if it has those speeds. Since you're moving them, it doesn't cost them any actions, and it is still forced movement, even though it's based on their own movement speed.
So it's not going to trigger, reactions or something.
Correct. And on a critical failure, not only did you do that, so not only did you move them right before they moved, and, at best they could move back.
And you definitely picked to move them in the least advantageous direction possible.
Right, but on the critical failure, you also disrupt their movement. So they were like, I'm going to move up to your fighter. No, you're going to move away from the fighter. And you didn't get the action. So you just got 2 left. And they're like, great,
well,
I guess I could...
one of those 2 to get back to where I started.
And this other one to move to the fighter, but then I'm done.
I spent all 3 of my actions to move once.
It's extremely disruptive. So it's very strong for the control build. Alright, so...
Is it time to throw more stuff at people?
Well... Yes. Crushing Toss at level 13 is going to throw an enormous unattended object or a chunk of the scenery at your foes.
So before we were throwing swords and things like that, and now we're throwing giant boulders or sections of collapsed roof or stuff like that. Statues. We are using our force to literally chew the scenery and throw it at our foes. It deals d6s of damage, and in a 10-foot emanation within 300 feet... So just hurling it. Basically what happens is you make an attack roll against the main target, and then everybody in the 10-foot emanation other than the target gets a reflex save against the damage as well. You could also target an empty square if you prefer all creatures to make a reflex save and you don't want to attempt a power attack roll. That is your business, not mine.
So the area in that 10-foot emanation becomes difficult terrain because you just threw a chunk of the battlefield
And
onto
now
that
it's
area.
broken and scattered everywhere, yeah.
And it's very unlikely that such a large chunk of scenery is entirely made of a special material, but in the very rare circumstances where the surroundings are entirely built out of a special material, the GM might determine the damage applies it. So if you're in a dungeon made out of adamantine for some reason, first of all, congratulations.
Yes.
You can retire.
Yes.
You have so much money, just sell that dungeon.
Yes.
But also, you can throw that adamantine.
Dungeon made of adamantine.
So on a critical success for the attack roll, the saving throw, the reflex save, by the way, is a basic save.
Yeah.
Okay? Just don't worry about it. It's just for the damage. But on the attack roll, you do more than that. This is why you usually want to
do the attack roll. And you want to get a direct hit on somebody instead of
if you don't want to, you can just splash them off.
Usually, but I guess like if you have some enemy and you're just like, oh my gosh, their AC is ridiculous.
Yeah, fair enough. But there might be some move that you can roll the attack
whatever
roll
the weakest creature in that area is, if you really want to.
So on a crit, they're not only take the damage, but double the damage, but they are knocked prone by the giant chunk of scenery and stunned 1. On a success, they are still knocked prone and take the damage.
So knocked prone and stunned 1, then they're probably gonna have to get up. So
good luck.
Be stunned 1,
good
and then
luck.
1 action left. Yeah.
On a failure, they take half damage on a failed attack roll, which is a lot for a failed attack roll.
David questions whether if you had a dungeon made of adamantine, whether your powers would be sufficient to rip out a chunk of adamantine from the wall.
I'm going to say no, but I'm assuming it's lying around. There's just this big boulder of adamantine that you can just throw.
So, like, part of the adamantine roof collapsed somehow because, like, I don't even know what.
You threw the barbarian at it previously with their adamantine weapon.
You can repeatedly throw the barbarian with the adamantine weapon until they cut down a chunk of adamantine ceiling, and then you had the roof ready. How loud would that be? Like a barbarian repeatedly
very, very loud. So, on a critical failure, you somehow miss the target despite throwing a gigantic chunk of the scenery at them. You still manage to affect other nearby creatures depending on their reflex saves. It's very shocking that you missed. It's like literally, like, can you hit the broadside of a barn? With another barn!
Yes!
Alright, so that is the damaging build.
But, well, actually, they're not that large, so it's like, it's more like, can you hit your enemy with the broadside of a barn? And the barn is what you're throwing.
Well, it depends on if your enemy is also a gargantuan creature.
I guess that's true. If your enemy is a gargantuan creature, it really is barn versus barn combat.
So that's for our heavy damage build. It's definitely not moving your enemies. But that's okay, because our control build has Puppet Master, which is one of its marquee abilities.
That definitely sounds like a control build ability, for sure.
Yes. You choose a creature within 60 feet. The target is affected depending on its fortitude save. Now, you could choose your ally, I guess. But the target can break free of your control and end the effect early by ripping off the threads of force by escaping against your power DC or spending 3 actions which have the manipulate trait to carefully remove them.
So
if it really doesn't like this, it can spend its whole turn to get rid of
that out.
this.
But that you know it's bad if it's like, or you could spend your entire turn to get rid of it is even a consideration.
So, for example, if they might be like, I'd rather escape, so I'll spend my first action to try to escape, and you're like, well, you fail. And I'm like, oh, this is too hard. So they could spend 2 actions to partially escape, and then on their next turn spend their third one, and have 2. But then they spent 4 total actions.
Yeah, that's
right?
a lot of actions.
It's a lot. So, on a critical success, they are unaffected. On a success, the next time they attempt to move, you nearly control their movement, but they manage to stave off the control at the last second. It disrupts their movement. Puppet Master's effect immediately ends. If the target doesn't attempt to move, the effect lasts until you refresh or they escape. So, basically, until the next time you escape, they escape or they refresh, the next time they attempt to move, it's going to be disrupted. And then Puppet Master will end. That's a success.
Yeah. So you still cancel their next move.
That's correct. Well, you cancel 1 action.
Yeah.
Failure. The next time they attempt to move, you control the movement from all the target's move actions for an entire round. The effect ends early if you refresh, if the target escapes, or if it removes the threads.
So they're going to realize, like, oh, no. And basically, they're probably going to have 1 move action that you control and then say, well, I guess I can't use move actions for the rest of my turn.
Right.
After you've put them in a position that is optimally bad for them.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's very bad. They go into a bad position, they realize it can't get better from here. It could only get worse if they move again.
So then they have to do other stuff, yeah.
Critical failure is just like what I said before, except it's not for 1 full round. It's until you refresh or they remove it. Anytime they move, you control. So they
just, at that point, just have to be like, guess I'm not moving.
You're the one who decides where they're moving. You're the puppet master.
Wow.
All right. So there's also one.
So what if you? I was thinking like the one instance where you might use that on an ally is like if you had a dominated ally or something like that.
Yeah, you could do that. It's not really very. There's not like they're kind of not your ally at that point, but it's kind of not worthwhile to spend this on your ally.
No, I know, but I'm trying to think about like when could you ever possibly use it on your ally? When would it ever be like in the social contract to completely puppet the movement of another person?
Well, let's say you have one ally whose name is, like, I don't know, Ted, and he just never moves into a flank, and he's just like a jerk. And Alice, who's playing the rogue, is like, Ted, come on, I need a flank. Ted's like, nah, I'm just gonna move it to this not flank spot. And Alice is like, come on, I didn't get gang up because we didn't need it, but you're never moving into a flank. And Ted's like, maybe you should get gang up. I'm literally going to move and not move to the flank, even though I have enough movement to move to the flank. And then the Puppet Master's like, Ted, you failed because Puppet Master, I'm forcing you to move to the flank.
I spent 2 actions to make you spend your action in a way that isn't messing up the rest of your team.
Ted's like, no, I live to ruin your entire party. Alright, so the other option you have at this level is the final refresh power, Disruptive Impulse, where you seize control of all the forces nearby. Until the beginning of your next turn, whenever a foe within a 60-foot emanation of you begins a move action other than a step, they must attempt a Fortitude save. And the Fortitude save basically allows you to reposition them 5 feet on a success, none on a critical success, 10 on a failure, or 20 on a critical failure just before the move. Now, this one does not have a limitation based on how far their stride is. So if you did manage to use ice to slow their movement speed down really low, this basically ruins them. Unless they can critically succeed. Because it's like, oh, well, your movement speed is 10 feet, and every time you try to move for this whole turn, I'm just going to move you first in the opposite direction you wanted to go. So it can be very funny in combination with other things, and obviously it helps you annoy your enemies by pushing them around as they move.
I mean, annoying your enemies is a pretty strong theme of Force.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. So we've now finished the refresh and reactive powers. There are 2 levels, 15 and 17, with active powers before we move to 19 for the ultimate powers. So at 15, the next one is Force Intrusion.
Time for some persistent damage.
Yes, you're going to intrude upon your foe with magical force that run contrary to their motion of their body. So they are going to take persistent force damage equal to 3d6 plus your level, depending on their fortitude save. And basically, whenever they fail the flat check to remove the force damage, you move pre-position them up to 10 feet.
So you're likely going to be continuing to get to move them around each day. It's kind of like an insult to injury. Damage and moved.
Even on a success, they still take the persistent force damage, but they automatically remove it, and therefore don't get moved. On a failure, they take it, and they don't automatically remove it after taking it once. On a critical failure, the flat check to remove it is DC 20, or 15 for especially effective assistance, so it's just...
It's gonna stick for a while.
Yes, it doesn't double the damage, by the way. It's just the regular amount.
It means that they're gonna get moved a lot, and they're gonna take the damage
it's very good for, like, messing around, and here's the worst part for them, is that it's at the end of their turn, so it's gonna mess them up.
And they're not going to have a chance to react.
They're not going to have a chance to react and fix it, or,
like,
use the fact that you moved them next to an ally to attack that ally, or anything like that. It's just like, now you're in the spot you don't want to be, and you can't do anything about it until your next turn. At which point, who knows, maybe I will have set up a disruptive impulse that's also going to mess you up during your movements. Your other choice for the damaging build is throw everything. If there was an unattended object nearby that you didn't fling, it's just because you didn't notice it. You throw everything. You make power attack rolls against any number of creatures within 60 feet. That's a lot of power attack rolls.
That's a lot of creatures, yeah.
It deals d8s of damage, and it's got the same situation about stuff, except since you're throwing so many objects, special materials like silver or adamantine typically don't apply. Unlike the object throw power, at the GM's discretion, if you are surrounded by only objects of one material, they might apply. So once again,
if you're in the adamantine treasury of adamantine bars,
that's full of like tiny adamantine coins and other small chunks.
That's why I was thinking like little bar
thousands of chunks of adamantine. Then maybe it can apply. All right, so we're doing great. We're gonna move to the most powerful non-ultimate powers, starting with Force Missile Fusillade, one of the very few where you actually just like shoot out little missiles of force at your enemies rather than using like threads of force or throwing things or anything like that. So you fire off an outrageous number of force missiles at foes, tying threads of force to allow them to home in on targets until they hit. Your fusillade contains a number of missiles equal to your level plus 1. Keep in mind, that is 18
That's
at
18
the minimum.
missiles.
At the
At
minimum.
the minimum, yes.
You can divide them among as many targets within 120 feet as you choose, up to a maximum number of the missiles in your fusillade. Make power attack rolls against every creature you targeted in this way. A single attack roll per creature regardless of how many missiles you fired. Dealing a combined total of d6 force damage per missile directed at that creature. If you fail a flat check to target a concealed or hidden creature, instead of losing the missiles entirely, apply the critical failure effect below. So, critical success. Your missiles critically hit the target for double damage.
Double damage.
Success. Normal damage. Failure. Some of the missiles hit and the others circle around to try again. Half of the missiles hit, rounded down, dealing their damage. At the beginning of your turns, until you refresh, continue to attempting attack rolls against that creature with the remaining missiles.
So the remaining missiles are just going to keep trying to...
So critical failure, or failing the flat check. All of the missiles miss, but they keep trying again. So it's as failure, but all of them keep trying again.
Oh, yeah, so you don't really lose them. You can...
Unless you refresh, being like, well, I'm out of moves, I guess
So
I
I'm
have
just
to
gonna
refresh.
do that, yeah,
You'll never actually lose them. They'll just keep going until
Yeah.
they either hit or you give up on them and
I see it
refresh.
mentioned that Silver Dungeon is not completely realistic.
No, Silver Dungeon is more
Silver Dungeon
realistic
could happen.
than that.
However, I feel like...
Cold Iron
yeah,
Dungeon.
that's true. Although, you gotta feel kind of bad for, like, this Silver or Cold Iron weak creature that's, like, in a situation where throw everything will be like, yeah, your entire room is just made of your weakness. It's stacked.
Maybe it's a fae who's been imprisoned in a Cold Iron Dungeon prison, and that's why. It's literally a dungeon for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously Force Missile Fusillade is great for blasting. It's very reliable because you're eventually going to hit.
Yes.
They're seeking missiles. Your other choice is Enduring Force Storm. It's a 20-foot radius burst within 120 feet of you. Foes that enter or start their turn in there are going to take half of a number of d6s of force damage and reposition 5 feet. By the way, no save. You can also reposition allies that start in there 5 feet. They don't take the damage. So that just happens.
So this is another one of those that has that kind of selective to not hurt your allies. It seems like a fair number of the ones that are dealing force damage or letting you be more careful, whereas the things that are more dealing bludgeoning and slashing and piercing and that kind of damage are more like, I'm just literally throwing
I'm throwing
stuff.
it everywhere.
I've hurled the object is going with its normal, it's just going to travel normally, whereas the force
throw
damage
everything
is
is making attacks against the creatures you want. But yes,
Yeah.
the one where you throw like
a giant boulder.
or a tree at
Yeah,
someone, if your allies are in underneath the boulder, they're getting crushed.
Yeah.
Don't throw it at your allies, or do if you feel like it. Alright, so we've moved up, we're ready for the ultimate powers. And as you might expect, there's something for everyone here. So the first ultimate power is Anansi. Emulating the skills of a mythical weaver and trickster, you interface threads of force everywhere, devastating your foes and moving all around you like puppets. The threads reach out to a 200-foot emanation. Willing allies with the emanation, you move up to 80 feet, and they're unharmed by the threads of force. On the other hand, you deal d6s of force damage to foes in the area, with results depending on their fortitude save. Success, half damage, move them 10 feet. Failure, full damage, move them 20 feet. Critical failure, double damage, move them 40 feet. So, it is a lot of movement, it is a lot of damage, it is the sort of the superlative form of... It's kind of like if Change Places was obscenely more powerful than it was.
So, like, you can turn a situation where you got ambushed and your positioning is just terrible into a thing where, like, let's rearrange the entire
all my
battlefield
allies are
considerably.
wherever I want within 80 feet, and my enemies, that depends on their saves, but I probably move them
But you know
too.
where they start at least, and so you can then try to, like, position based on that. Or can you choose the order in which you move creatures?
I mean, yeah, you're doing it kind of at the same time, so you're gonna wanna... You're going to want to figure it out.
Yeah, I feel like you probably want to assess where the enemies move
See what their
first,
saving throws are before
once
you
you're like,
decide
alright,
what your
and then
allies
move your
are.
allies, yeah.
The other choice is the Symplegades. You call forth clashing chunks of force energy in a 60-foot emanation that slam into each other and foes in the area, dealing damage and repositioning them wherever you please. At the end of your turn, the chunks of force clash against each other, dealing 1d4s of force damage to every foe in the area, with effects depending on their reflex save, and allowing you to reposition allies up to 20 feet without harming them until you refresh. Success, they take half damage and you can't reposition them. Failure, full damage and reposition 10 feet. Critical failure, double damage and reposition 20 feet. It's a 60-foot emanation. So most battlefields, that's the whole battlefield. You just have clashing force that's constantly moving every turn, doing smaller
every turn.
movements.
So this is so you have the one that's like the giant like one-off boom rearranged, and then this one's more of like a continual effect.
Yes, and you won't move them nearly as far. The damage is actually not that much less than a Nunci, but the movement is way less, and the area is way less, but in exchange, you do it every turn. If the enemies can't get out of there or move the fight to a different location...
And it's harder to get out of there when you're like, oh, you're trying to get out of there? Let me use my moving you to move you not out of there.
So quickly, we'll go through the other abilities. Elemental Locomotion is basically telekinetically throwing yourself in a straight line, even vertically. Elemental Manipulation is a telekinetic movement of one bulk or less. Elemental Resistance is a bonus on saves against force effects and resistance to force damage. Elemental Sculptor lets you sculpt force to move an object up to 40 bulk. Elemental Senses projects a field of force sensors to give you motion sense. Elemental Shield is that if and somebody misses their melee attack only because of the Elemental Shield, they become off guard by the force disrupting their defenses. Elemental Surge is a 5 feet of extra movement and to move your enemies. And Elemental Locomotion, the enhanced locomotion, is basically a fly speed where you are throwing yourself through the sky. So those are all the powers. Let's quickly look at what Eldamon exists so we can see which of the builds they each prefer. The common Eldamon is Pot Fox. The Force Fox Eldamon. Pot Fox loves cooking and brewing, especially cooking soup and brewing potions. Pot Fox can become a Kong Cauldron in a battle and evolve into Kong Koen, and evolves into Kong Koen if you help Pot Fox become a brewmaster with many recipes. The basic elemental ability Stir the Pot is whenever you reposition a foe using your force powers, you move them a little bit more. As long as it would reposition them 10 feet or more, it goes additional 5 feet, and if it would be 30 feet or more, it's actually an additional 10 feet.
So this is going to be really good for a lot of those powers.
Many of the powers were 10, and it gives you 50% more movement than that. Their form ability, Have Pot Will Travel, basically allows them to move around in their pot and then spend a single action to retract into the pot to gain +2 AC but be immobilized until your next turn. Though they can end it early with a single action.
Nin says that Pot Fox is almost always one of my 3 starters.
It's a good choice. Fox Force is their evolution ability. They're dancing wisps of Fox Force. They're almost like little Fox Fires, but they're actually made out of force. Briefly reveal hidden creatures similar to Fairy Fire. When you hit a creature with a power attack, roll with a force power, it takes force damage. Or a creature fails its saving throw against your force power and takes force damage. If the creature was invisible, it becomes concealed instead. If it was visible, it can't be concealed.
Oh, so that's going to help you a lot with making sure that they are not going to be able to get out of your moving them around shenanigans by becoming invisible.
It lasts until the end of your next turn. And this happens every time. So it's just a generally, it's like most common Eldamon, is generally useful. It gets extra movement, and the enemy can defend itself, and you can help deal with creatures that can't be seen using those threads of force to kind of reveal them to your allies. Your next choice, if you have uncommon, is Surikabe, the Force Wall Eldamon. Surikabe loves fishing and baiting, and if you help it pull off an epic baiting scheme or a series of great schemes, it just likes to bait people into doing stuff. It can evolve from the ability to turn into the Furikabe, which is its battle form, into Morikabe, its evolved form. So Morikabe is an even bigger, gigantic form that has the evolution ability. Let's start off. The elemental ability, Confounding Force. You bait and bedevil foes with your force powers, momentarily confounding them and weakening their next attack. Whenever you hit with a power attack roll on a force power, or foe fails their save against your force power, you interfere with their next attack. The next time they deal damage before the end of your next turn, they take a -2 circumstance penalty on their damage roll, which increases eventually to -8.
So these are kind of troll walls.
They're troll walls that give penalties on the enemy's damage. Their form ability, Wall Off, is your body is essentially a wall. It's difficult to move through your space. While tiny creatures can still enter your space, they can't automatically cross through it. They still need to tumble through or use a similar ability. The DC to tumble through against you is either your power DC or the usual DC with a +2, whichever is higher.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just harder to move through you because you're a giant wall.
Because you're a wall.
And the evolution ability is called Ban Hammer. Your hammer rebuffs creatures and bans them from returning. When you shove with your body unarmed attack, you can use your hammer instead. If you do, you gain a +2 circumstance bonus to your athletics check to shove. If you succeed on the target's next turn, if it attempts to move toward you during its move action, it must succeed on a fortitude to save against your power DC, or it can't.
Oh yeah, because Murakabe literally has a hammer.
Yes, Morikabe has a giant hammer. It's the Ban Hammer. It's more of it the way it trolls you. It's gonna force move you and then ban you from doing what you want to do with its little ban hammer, and it synergizes for some of the controlled movement, and especially if you're willing to get up close and personal with your foe.
I'm seeing some appreciation for the way you name these abilities in chat.
Thank you. I tried to name them interestingly. So the second uncommon choice is Cephalidal, the Force Cephalopod, their battle form is Cephalocus and their evolved form is Cephalord. So Cephalidal loves geometry, and their evolution condition is helping them solve a groundbreaking problem in geometry or otherwise reach a great geometric breakthrough. Their elemental ability, Locus of Force, allows them to use geometry to apply their force across a wider locus of points. The range of their force powers that have a range increases by 20 feet. It only affects the range at which you can affect target. It doesn't increase the distance you can reposition them. The area of your burst, cone, and emanation force powers also increases by 5 feet in length or radius. If you're an expert in power DCs, the area increases by 10 feet in length or radius instead. So it basically you use geometry to do better on your areas and your ranges.
Chad has also decided that Banhammer should be used on Ted, the trollish non-flanking ally.
It should.
Multiple people agree.
You definitely should use on Ted, the trollish non-flanking ally. The form ability, Locus Arms, is that your arms are myriad, powered by force energy, and geometrically stable as you move across the ground, which gives you a +2 on fortitude and reflex DCs against attempts to shove or trip you. Or other effects that try to knock you prone. When an effect would force you to move and you're near a wall, ceiling, or other edge with easy handholds, you can actually grab an edge to not be moved.
You got lots of arms.
You do. And it reduces the force movement by 20 feet on a success or 30 on a critical success instead of reducing falling distance. And your evolution ability, your etheric third eye, is a third eye formed of aether concentrated right there on your little forehead. It allows you to perceive things geometrically through forces, automatically succeeding on flat checks to target concealed or hidden creatures. So it's a little bit more selfish than Pop Fox's ability to reveal stuff to your allies.
I see,
but you don't need to hit them first to get it to work.
So then Pop Fox is like, okay, let's reveal them so everyone can fight. Whereas Cephalord is eventually going like, all right, I don't care. I will maneuver and position them.
Okay, so one of the weirdest but also best Eldamon in the entire book, Cyrano. It's not even the color of a lot of the other Force Eldamon. It's like pink. It kind of looks like a Mind Eldamon in a lot of ways. It's got like a little spiral on it. And there's a reason for that. So Cyrano is the telekinetic T-Rex Eldamon. It's a little T-Rex. It's got tiny little arms, and it creates giant hands of force to use instead of its tiny little arms. So Cyrano is for your build if you wanted to do the damage build. But Cyrano's deal is that they love erudite conversation. They want you to think that they're much smarter than they are. And
they want you to think they're a Mind Eldamon.
They also want you to think they're a Mind Eldamon, an intelligent and classy Mind Eldamon with impeccable conversational sensibilities. So they are pretending to be Mind. They're actually Force. They're rare, so not everyone's heard of them. Their evolution conditioning is helping them ascend to new heights of abstruse conversation. So, their elemental ability, Telekinetic Storm, says, whether you're trying to disguise your force powers as a mind power, or you just enjoy moving objects around, you deliver force powers via objects, even when others would use Aether, the pure threads of spun force. Anytime your force power would deal force damage, you can choose to have it deal bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage instead, via the use of small objects. If the power would already throw an object and deal one of those damage types, you would instead gain a +1 status bonus to the damage roll, which scales up to +4. It has the form ability Force Hands. Your tiny arms don't do too much on their own, but you keep Force Hands of Aether manifested whenever you desire, and those pack quite a punch. And you use athletics to grapple, shove, or trip. You can use your giant force hands to assist you, and it lets you use your intelligence modifier instead of your strength modifier, and gives you a circumstance bonus on your athletics checks. When you use a force power that doesn't deal force damage, you can attempt a deception check against the higher of an observer's perception, nature, or occultism DC to trick them into thinking you're using a mind power instead of a force power. It's totally a mind power.
Totally a mind power, guys. I'm not a force element.
And the evolution ability, Aetheric Spikes. You're covered in spikes made of aether, and when you've turned into Rex Spell, because their battle form is Aetheropod, and their evolved form is Rex Spell. A creature that attempts a melee unarmed strike or a non-reach melee strike against you, whether or not it hits, takes 4 force damage, or with a basic reflex save against your power DC at 19th level, this increases to 5 force damage. And so that's Cyrano. So if you want to just throw objects around and deal lots of damage, Cyrano's your one. It's going to deal bonus damage. If you want to get up there in your enemy's face and actually use your melee attacks as part of the weird denial strategy, that's Surikabe. If you want to stay safe at a distance, use Potfox or Cephalidal. Potfox for greater amount of moving the enemy and a little bit of defense. Cephalidal for a larger area of effect and a longer range. So those are the Eldamon you can pick. Combine those with the builds we talked about throughout this episode, and you are going to be using the Force in a way that you've decided. Whether that's full control, whether that's full damage, or a hybrid build that allows you to do a little bit of either. So, yeah, that's it for the Force element, folks.
Let's go ahead
Thanks for joining us. Please like or subscribe if you like this kind of content. And, of course, if you want to join us to support us, we're all for it. We're going to add in some XP and then do a vote for the next episode of Arcane Mark. So, we've actually had the vote up since the beginning. We're going to go back and grab the text for the vote.
I see 2 votes for 1 up at the top.
That's
there.
right. 2 votes for 1, which is
There may
Build
be
an
others.
Item Workshop up
Let's
at the
scroll
top.
down a little. Looks like I didn't see any. Beyond
So,
that.
you can vote for Build an Item Workshop, Ask Arcane Mark, Save My Game Q&A, Adjusting for Circumstances, Arcane Mark Plays, which we've been doing on Saturdays, and we may want to keep doing on Saturdays, and Eldamon Element, or
Looks like
other.
it was 6. I went for 6. Build an adventure hook.
We have done Build Adventure Workshops before, in the Build category. We've done like the entire sort of adventure, including the hook. So we can put Build an Adventure for 6. I'll put that in there. So we've got 3 votes for 1, 1 vote for 6, and 1 vote for 3.
So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that if one, I don't think Sis is gonna win here, but
if
I think
one wins, we can just put Build an Adventure into the next one, because we've definitely done Build an Adventure before. We're not gonna build the whole adventure, but we'll build like the basic skeleton of the adventure. Like, what is it about? What is the gist of it? So, all right.
6 phasing.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna say we're not gonna do an episode that is entirely about the minutiae of phasing, just because I don't think that the desire is there for it. It's the kind of thing that you probably don't want a YouTube episode of discussion points for, but maybe more want to just read it, or have something that's like a demo, or someone who has a channel, which we don't do, of like a Foundry demo where they're like showing something off. That's just kind of what I feel. What do you think, Linda?
Yeah, I think it would fit better as something that could be part of more of like a grab bag style thing, where it would have like a touch on that and then also talk about other things. So that doesn't seem like something we could spend a full episode on.
Sounds good. So we now actually have a vote change that was changed from 1 to 6. So they're now
2 votes for.
No, it's changed from 3 to 6. So there's 2 on
yeah.
6 and 3 on 1. So I think 1 has made it.
Yes.
Because also the vote for 6 phasing is really kind of a 7 phasing as well. So yeah, let's do a.
But I am curious, when you're talking about phasing, are there still like a specific question about phasing
they have mentioned in the Discord before that it's just like going over point by point like all of the rules corner cases of phasing.
Yeah.
For Eldamon. So all right, it looks like 1 has made it. So we're going to do Build an Item Workshop, but we'll put Build an Adventure as a replacement workshop idea, everybody. So thanks for joining us. I hope you have enjoyed learning about these Force Element builds. If you do, and you make a Force Elemental Avatar or some Force Eldamon on your team, like people were saying in chat that I think Nin said Pop Fox is always one of his starters. So let us know in the chat what you're doing with the Force Element, or if you have a different build than one of the ones that we were talking about here. Take care, and we'll see you next time, everyone.